the Deep Sea Podcast, a punk take on a science podcast about everything deep sea. I'm Dr. Tom Lindley. With me is the Professor Alan Jameson. Hello.
Hello.
It's good to see you, mate.
I can actually see you too. I can see that big quiff of yours.
Yeah, it's gone a bit blonde. I've got a diet, but I've got to get the other side of Halloween because I've got to be number block 7 for Halloween.
You look like you're squatting in a house because it's got no electricity.
I just divert it all to podcasting.
Yes.
Got a little generator off shot. Yeah. We're doing a few more of the video ones. George has been putting a few of them out. So if you ever want to see how tired we looked, then you can just have a look on YouTube.
I'll have a look at all the random stuff that's on my whiteboard behind me.
I know, the secret's on there.
There is.
Somebody could digitize, enhance.
The big question is, what does WBM in the bottom corner mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what that is? I read it as mom equals A, mom equals S.
Oh, no, that's a different thing. I can't remember what that is, but underneath it does say the more the merrier, say the arthropoda.
Nice.
Yeah, but on the other side it says WBM. That's a secret.
That's a secret one.
If you can guess what it is, I'll send you an arthropod.
It won't be wrapped, it won't be preserved, it'll just be in an envelope.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember Sweaty Betty. Sorry, we were already off point.
Yeah, I talk about Sweaty Betty quite a lot. It's a genuinely interesting thing.
It's the amount of oil that's in them.
Yeah, it's just lipid, right? So we just put a dead arthropod on a piece of tissue paper, and over the course of the trip just kept moving it as it leached its lipid into the paper. And it just never stopped. Just never stopped giving up its lipid.
It desiccated, it just completely dried out, but it was always shiny and wet with oil.
Yeah.
As all the waxes broke down.
Ah, Sweaty Betty. Where is Sweaty Betty now, anyway? Sweaty Betty's still in Newcastle?
No, I think she was set free. She'd gone a bit too far. Do you remember she was in a jar saying, "Do not open"?
Yeah.
It was written along the side.
I don't think Sweaty Betty would have cleared Australian biosecurity. Something
That's
tells
just
me I might
just
have got
let her
pulled
in.
up on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good old
Has it been
Sweaty
preserved
Betty.
now?
No, she's been sweating now for 6 years.
Anything growing on is welcome to her.
Yeah.
So what have you been up to? Busy times? Back in Oz for a bit?
Deep sea stuff, mate. Deep sea stuff.
Oh, really nailing up deep sea stuff.
Yeah. I spent all day today getting my head hurt by glass sponges. We're filming so many glass sponges at the moment, and I've got a guy, a PhD student, who's in the glass sponges, and he's doing a pretty good job of it. But then we have to write all these reports and try and list everything we've seen, So the glass sponges, the anemones are killing me as well. There's never two the same. So there's some groups of animals that are just really annoying.
True. Sponges is way up there.
Well, sponges are getting better because we've got a guy who knows about them.
Yeah.
Right? And we've now got a midwater guy who knows all about gelatinous stuff and ctenophores and all that kind of carry on, which is great. And we've got a guy now
And to be
who
fair, the
does
deep
worms.
sea ones seem to stick to a theme. Like it's the shallower ones where it can be a sort of globular vase shape, or it can be this encrusting mat, and it's the same species.
Oh, you think so, do you? Oh, don't you try and tell me the complexities of the morphotypes of a sponge. I know more about this than you do.
I guarantee it.
It's just yeah. I think the anemones are the annoying one.
Okay.
So we've got new experts in house for all sorts of different animal groups, but we don't have anyone who knows about anemones. They're really irritating.
I remember learning very recently to relax them with menthol before you end their lives. Because if you just whack them in ethanol, they clench up into a little ball and they're sort of no good for trying to figure out what they are. So you need to have the crown open when you preserve it. And apparently menthol is how they chill out.
Wow. So like the heroin for anemones.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, so a few menthol crystals and they all open up lovely and then you kill them. Kill them real quick.
All right. I'll remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that and spoonworms as well. They're just the weirdest things.
Overlooked little group.
Yeah, I don't really understand how such a thing evolved. It makes you wonder. The complexities and the beauty and just the fascination in other animal groups, and then there's the spoonworm. You're just like, you're nothing more than a plastic sock full of goo that struggles to do anything at all. It's the most like primeval thing. But no, there they are. We film them quite a lot now, and they're just bizarre. Can't say I'm ever going to have a picture of one on my wall.
Well,
we'll never get the money shot of a spoonworm. They're too ugly. There will never be a money shot of a spoonworm. That's
That's as good as they look, and they can only look worse.
Yeah. Oh, but we did get something cool, which I sent to you. Remember last week?
Oh yeah.
So this was lander footage from the first leg in the Tonga Trench expedition about 2 or 3 months ago. In total, I think we added up today, I think in total we just collected 56 days of continuous video. And so it takes a bit of time to crunch through it. And people watch it on fast forward and try and use the software to log all the animals coming in, animals coming out. And some folk just skim through it. And we skim through it on the ship, but we don't have time to do all of it. But anyway, so it turns out somewhere about 1,000 meters deep in Tonga 2 months ago, we inadvertently filmed a goblin shark.
In life, looking good.
Looking
how
good
they should look.
without the big relaxed, horrible, weird jaw thing that comes out. The reason I sent it to you is because I didn't think goblins were that chunky. I thought they were quite slick-looking things, or quite small and like fast, slim-looking things. But this thing's quite a beefy animal.
It's a weird stubby body, isn't it? All these rounded fins like packed at the back. It's all big pointy. It's not even a pointed snout really, it's a paddle.
Yeah.
And then this really stocky body with these chunky rounded fins.
Yeah. So it did the rounds a little bit. Can't think of what else it can be. It's got to be a goblin. So, I mean, it's not the best footage in the world. It's not like a money shot, but because it's quite skittish, it doesn't come right up like the big shark did, or like the way the big fin did. It didn't come out and give you that glory shot. It's kind of swimming around in the low lighty bit, but it looks like it's definitely a goblin.
It's so rare to see them in like this resting state. It's obviously cruising around. It's obviously interested in the lander, but it's like all the footage is like horrible, distended, full of burst capillaries, so they go pink, and this distended jaw, whereas just seeing it chill out. It's interesting that like we weren't sure what it was for a while because you're not used to seeing them like that.
Yeah, you're not used to see them in good nick. Has anyone ever filmed them before?
There's some live footage. They come a lot shallower in Japan, so there's some footage there. And there's that, what I think was staged, I think it's from a Discovery Channel documentary where it's like being given a redfish.
Yeah.
And the fish looks like it's dead. So I think somebody's like feeding them, but it gets that great shot of it extending the jaws like that. But yeah, it's good to see one just chilling out.
It's one of those species that when you try and get some comparative shots of it from other sources, the internet's so full of models and drawings and artist impressions and fan art and all the rest of it that it's actually completely swamped to any real. It's difficult to actually find any genuine footage of it.
We are at the cusp of something even worse, which is all the image searches are getting swamped with AI generated stuff.
Yeah. And
for certain key groups that people are generating images of, like 2/3 of what Google Images say bring up isn't real. And I think we're just at the cusp of it, but I think we've got a real issue coming where actually we've just flooded all these repositories with nonsense, and it's going to be even more hard work. It's plenty of work already, but it's going to be even more hard work to try and convince people of what's real because they've just been fed nonsense.
Yeah, because I was looking at pictures of the goblin shark the other day because I was trying to find a decent picture of it actually alive and not mangled lying on a beach somewhere or whatever it may be, or, like you said. And there's a few images there that are actually really convincing. Like that actually, it looks a bit like ours, but they keep having the jaw hanging out, which you wouldn't swim around with its jaw hanging out like that, right? Because so then you 2 steps into it, you realize that it's not. That's just some computer generated rubbish.
Yeah,
and they've just decided that that's the dead, relaxed, flaccid-looking goblin shark is what it looks like in life. And it was quite weird because it's so iconic that it doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't exist as the animal. It's become, what's it called where like Xerox had this and Hoover had this, where the name becomes so ubiquitous they lose their brand?
Yeah.
It's that. The goblin shark brand has taken away from the animal.
Yeah. But I was quite pleased because I always thought the goblin shark was up there, that sort of group of animals that you never thought you would ever film. It's up there with the giant squid and stuff like that. And, we've had quite a good run recently. Big fins.
That's a really good one.
Slipper sharks and goblins. And I think that what's paying off is just the sheer volume of cameras in the water at any given time. We just pulled off another 100, I don't know, whatever it was now, 110 landers with another 20 subdives, and just having cameras everywhere all of the time in the same place over and over again. And it's completely paying off. What's your song of the week?
I had nothing sort of poignantly deep sea, so I'll just go with what I've got stuck in my head, which is a nice little jazzy track called Guns N' Roses, Not Those Ones, which is actually the title theme song to Bakano, which is a fairly okay anime, but for some reason this theme song just got totally lodged in my brain and I had it on repeat a little bit. So we'll have a little bit of that.
Is it good though?
Yeah. Jazziness. It's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't do jazz.
No.
I like the idea of it, but I just don't like it.
I'm glad people are out there enjoying jazz. It's not for us.
Yeah, I mean, you can't enjoy everything. That's the way I see it.
As ever, massive thank you to the patrons. They really are what keep this show going. Lots of nice chat going on over there. We've had some more puns bouncing around. We've had some art. We've had a poem, which will be towards the end of the show. So stick around for that one. You popped in for a little while, Alan. Rattled off interesting characters you've met along the way.
Yes, I did.
Nice little community coming on there. Still new folk joining every week. It's nice.
Yeah.
Should we crack on with some news?
Well then, what's in the news, Tom?
Something I mentioned on a previous one that it was just nice to see people talking about, that the internet is deep sea. You are hearing our voices now, crisp and fresh from the depths, and it's just something we kind of overlook. So 99% of the world's digital communication runs through subsea cables, 1.4 million kilometers, that's 870,000 miles of cable on the seafloor, and most are just the width of a hose pipe, actually. They're really, really small. I didn't realize that is sort of deliberate in some areas, like the heavily armored cables are where you tend to have risk of people interacting with them. And then actually once you go deep, they tend to be like the size of a hose pipe. So these whole data channels that are going across the Pacific and between Oz and New Zealand and things like that, they are just the size of a hose pipe just laying across the seabed. Because if you armored it, then bringing it up would make it sort of break under its own weight. They do get damaged about 150 to 200 times a year. So the global network is like constantly self-correcting. So there'll be a few connections. So if one goes down, then the other one takes the load. And you probably only notice your website loading a little bit slower, not realizing that there's this huge engineering undertaking to go and fix it. Shark attacks used to get blamed for breaking a lot of the cables, but that's a total myth. About 70 to 80% are from human activity, basically trawling, dropping anchors, etc. So that's why they tend to be armored around where people are. But as commercial fishing runs deeper, they are more likely to impact these cables. So we're going to see that happening more and more. And they're serviced by an army of repair ships that are always on standby, scattered strategically around the globe so they can get to them quickly. And if a fault is found, a ship is dispatched. Usually only takes 10 to 12 days to reach one of these cables from wherever it is on the planet. So it's pretty impressive, really.
But what I don't get is, like, if you've got 1.4 million kilometers of cable on the seafloor, if it's buried, then you can take the footprint of 1.4 million kilometers of hose pipe, which doesn't sound much, but it is when you think about the length of it. If that's not sunk in the sediment, then it's a barrier to benthic organisms moving from one place to another, and you'll get accumulation of material on one side of it. If it is buried, then you've created a barrier to all the infauna from moving from one place to another, and therefore you've displaced part of the seafloor. And so what would be the total footprint of perturbed deep sea based on the internet?
I won't even say whether it's good or bad. It's just an interesting thing how much we are talking about deep sea mining, but this is just a given. Like, yeah, got to have Facebook. So in deeper waters, usually they jet ahead of the cable layer, so blast the sediment out of the way and then lay it into a trough. But when it gets deeper, it is done by plows, and again with jets to clear the way. So some plows can weigh over 50 tons, and in extreme environments, so there was one that had to get through the permafrost, it can be as much as 110 tons. So that's capable of burying cables 4 meters deep and penetrating permafrost. So this is not a small operation.
That must do massive, massive damage to the seafloor, though, right?
But we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And these are regularly pulled up and serviced and repaired and put back down. I agree it's necessary. I agree the amount of lives saved and the necessity to live in this linked up world. But I just think it's interesting we never talk about this.
We don't want to talk about it in case they stop the internet and no one can see funny raccoon videos anymore.
Oh, I need them funny. Have you seen the one when he washes the candy floss?
No. I saw one recently where the raccoon thought he was being shot and did a whole dying scene.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, see, this is how much we love raccoon videos. This is why we shouldn't highlight the existential damage we're doing to the deep sea because we want raccoon videos.
Smash it up for the raccoon videos. All right, I am making a judgment call. It's fine. It's good.
Right. Let's never talk about it again.
Chatting with that on the Discord led one of the patrons to throw me in the direction of a story based on actually cable laying. It's way back from 1967. So it's Drift Glass by Samuel L. Delaney. And there's a wonderful reading of it as a podcast. So I'll put a link in the show notes for it's like 45 minutes, an hour long. It's a nice little sort of short sci-fi story about cable laying people in the near future. It's quite a good one. Some interesting research on deep sea heat waves. 80% of heat waves below 100 meters turn out to be totally separate from surface events. So that makes it really difficult to monitor them from, say, satellites and things like that. It also means that what we are sort of experiencing as humans, what we have access to, might be totally different to what's happening just 100 meters below. So a study combined data from more than 2 million global temperature profiles, and 70% of the detected deep heat waves were in eddies that have impacts on sort of cycling and nutrient distribution. But it's really interesting that tracking temperature anomalies in the surface just has so little bearing on what's going on underneath. So things are getting warm without us knowing about it, and these little blobs of hot water are knocking around down there, which will probably have all sorts of impacts on the oxygen minimum zone and things like that.
Yeah.
And the last one reminds me a lot of work I think you were involved with back in the day, Alan. You certainly taught it, I remember, about the saturated phospholipid bilayer. That was it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we used to do a bit of that.
Yeah, how it sort of kept fluid.
Yeah, it's the old spreadable butter analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you read Peter Herring's book, going way back, Biology of the Deep Sea from 20-odd years ago, he was talking about that. I think that's what did it actually inspire it, or was it just a good analogy? It was polyunsaturated versus monounsaturated. So if you put a type of butter in the fridge, it will go hard, and it's really hard to spread on your toast. But then you've got spreadable butter, and it moved from poly to mono or mono to poly. I can't remember which one. But that's essentially the difference between shallow water cell membranes and deep water membranes. So when they go down in the deep sea where it's cold or it's high pressure, because the pressure and temperature do the same thing, to maintain fluidity, you need a bilayer which is akin to spreadable butter, so it doesn't go hard. Whereas shallow water animals don't care, because it's warm enough and the pressure is relaxed enough, they can get away with the cheaper version. It doesn't go hard because nothing's perturbing it.
And they've got to be optimized to the environment they're in. So that either way, it's not going to work. If you send something shallow too deep, its cell membranes set like butter in the fridge.
Yeah.
And then they break. It's wild. So a little bit of a follow-on to that, actually, which is that they're wiggly as well. Wiggly membranes for pressure adaptation. So 3/4 of the lipids in the deep sea comb jellies were a type of curved lipid that's actually rarer in surface animals. So in the pressure of the deep sea, the curvy molecules conformed to the exact shape needed to support a sturdy yet dynamic cell membrane. They've always got to be on a balancing act, basically, between being fluid enough to allow things to move through, but there's still things anchored in the cell membrane. There's still molecules that pass through them, signaling proteins and things like that have to maintain a structure but held in this fluid thing. So it was described as a liquid crystal, which was quite cool. So they've got to be just the right amount of fluid, not too fluid, not too rigid. And then interestingly, they fall apart when they come up to atmospheric pressure. So these sort of spring-loaded phospholipid bilayers, they overcompensate when they get shallower, so they sort of pull themselves apart, which reminded me of the critters that we sometimes used to bring up that seem to break down and disappear in front of you. So all their cell membranes are probably rupturing, or at least the ones that adopt this form of pressure tolerance.
I've got a good story about pressure adaptation that isn't actually true, but they thought it was at the time.
Go for it.
Comes from this little book. I think I read something from this little book before. It's Sidney Hickson and the Fauna of the Deep Sea from 1893. And it's one of these books that obviously realised that, contrary to what you hear on the TV, they actually knew quite a lot about the deep sea 130 years ago. There's certainly the major things, but there's a great bit in here where there's some things that they just seem to have gotten wrong, which is fair enough, it's 130 years ago. But one of them is tumbling up.
Oh, yeah.
So tumbling up is they realise that there's gas in the swim bladder of a deep sea fish, and if the deep sea fish gets a bit overzealous or a bit excited chasing its prey, it might come off the bottom too far. Thus, the gas in its swim bladder expands, and if it expands, it's got a greater positive buoyancy. And if that positive buoyancy becomes more than the downward thrust through locomotion or the weight, the negative buoyancy of the rest of the animal, it will go into an uncontrollable tumble up. It will just suddenly inflate, and then, of course, the higher it goes, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
And so they had this thing that, well, why isn't this tough as the sea covered in these bloated deep sea fish that have got a bit too excited, they've gotten a little bit too close to the sun, and then suddenly went, oh God, that's it, I'm done. And then he actually says it's the only animal in the natural world that would tumble up, but everything else would tumble down.
I like it.
I'm not sure there's any validity in that whatsoever. I'd imagine the fish are probably like, my stomach's going to pop any second.
Yeah,
or maybe
I don't
just
think it feels nice.
Yeah.
But I think it certainly can happen. Like when there's a seismic event and lots of them sort of float to the surface, there is a point where they would just accelerate and.
But that's beyond their control. I think it's just sort of general swimming around day to day.
I don't think you'd last very long as an organism if you did something that stupid.
Yeah.
But I think it does happen from time to time. The great swallowers, most of the samples of those we have is because they ate something too big and it started to decompose in their stomach and they swell up like a balloon and shoot to the top.
They need to evolve farting.
They do. It would save lives. Fart to save lives.
That would work. The great deep sea burp.
Have you seen Godzilla -1? Have I spoken about it on here?
I watched Godzilla and Kong when I was back in the UK last time.
Close enough.
I mean, I'd imagine it's much of the same movie, just one's got an ape in it and one doesn't. One had loads of apes in it.
There's a little ape war, isn't there?
Yeah, and they all just punch each other in the face repeatedly over and over again.
So he's finally reunited with his people and realizes he's no longer the last of his kind. And the first thing that's done is some punching. Anyway, it's got some very, very good and very accurate explosive decompression of fish going on in there. So the sign that Godzilla's coming is all these deep sea fish floating on the surface like balloons swollen up. And they'd obviously done their research because I'm like IDing some of them. They were quite good.
So who are we talking to today then, Tom?
So someone called Andrea got in touch through Instagram just saying, hey, just discovered the show, really liked it. And then I looked at her profile and she's so much more interesting than us. She's great. So it turns out that she is pretty prolific and one of the early adopters of Blackwater diving, which I've gushed about a few times in the past. It's only really gone on for the last 8 years maybe. And it's a new form of diving over deep water in the open ocean at night where all the stuff comes up and it just leads to this stunning photography. And it was a really good chat. So I'll pass on to them now. To find out more about the world of Blackwater diving, I've got a whole gang. Usually it's a single guest, but I've got a whole group here with me. So I will just let you introduce yourselves to begin with. And do you have a team name?
Darn, we need to come up with one.
No, it's kind of a pickup group. Yeah. Andrea, why don't you lead off?
Okay. My name is Andrea Whitaker. I am a jack of all trades in the dive industry, I suppose. So I primarily am a scuba instructor, underwater photographer. I teach underwater photography. And then I'm one of the main crew members on the Blackwater dives over the past 8 years we've been running these.
I'm Rich Collins, and I'm a retired businessman. I'm a Blackwater diver, amateur diver, and a photographer. And over the years, I've morphed into a collector and photographer for the Florida Museum of Natural History and also for the Smithsonian, as all of us have. And we've sort of turned into a research arm a little bit of all sorts of different institutions that are looking to get information on invertebrates and larval fishes and so forth that inhabit the Blackwater realm.
And my name is Linda Iannello. I'm a retired IBMer, and I've been doing the Blackwater dives as long as they've been running them locally. So that's about 8 years, about 500 dives, and started out learning about these subjects, how to identify them, what they are, and then learn more about them, and eventually co-authored a book about Blackwater creatures so that we could educate other people. And then eventually got into the collecting with Rich, contributing to the science behind it all. And it's been great being able to hand them off to Rich, and then he catalogs and gets them to the appropriate scientists. So it's been a group effort, and it's just been great.
I have to give a shout out to the Florida Museum. That's the primary institution that I'm associated with. I'm a volunteer staff member on invertebrate zoology group there. And that's where we've sent about 1,000 specimens that we've collected to the museum. And those have ended up in many papers and many more in the works.
I have gushed about Blackwater diving on the show before because it really grabbed hold of me. But for anyone who's just landed on this episode without hearing any of the others, what is Blackwater diving? What sets it apart from scuba diving we might be more familiar with?
Blackwater diving is super special. So in Palm Beach in particular, at night after the sun goes down, we go out. It's about 4 to 6 miles offshore. So we're looking for depths typically between 700 to 800 feet. However, some nights we stay in a little closer to shore. So maybe perhaps 400, 500 feet deep. Then we have a long line that's got lights all over it, a float on top so it stays afloat, and a weight at the bottom so it stays taut. We throw that in the water. Generally, we're in the Gulf Stream, or we're in some portion of the Gulf Stream. And we throw the rig in with the lights on, and then everyone jumps in the water. So we're freely drifting in the Gulf Stream here in Palm Beach. And your quote-unquote dive guide is going to be this line with the lights all over it. So we keep within the vicinity of that light, and we're freely drifting maximum depth generally speaking, for the majority of the dive is about 50 feet. And then we're looking for these larval or even pelagic creatures that you don't necessarily see on the reef or just generally on other recreational dives. So the idea of being out to those deeper depths is to hopefully get to see some deep water species or more pelagic species than what you would closer to shore.
No, that's a great summary, because a night dive has been a thing for a while, but this is quite specific. This is open water. This is over deep water, and yeah, it's its own thing. So that you sort of led onto it there with, why is a dive to 50 feet on the Deep Sea podcast? It's because the deep sea comes to you.
That's right. It comes up every night. We're seeing all sorts of sort of fish that live in much, much deeper water than the water that we're in. All these sort of dial organisms that are coming up to the surface, in this sort of great migration every night after sunset, where, there's just this huge number of creatures rising from the depths. And you can actually see them sometimes when you're swimming around. You can see fish just shooting by you like a rocket heading for, towards the surface.
And why does it only seem to have appeared quite recently? Like, it seems to be this 8-year mark. We've been scuba diving for so long, but it feels like Blackwater diving is kind of new, or maybe it's galvanized and formed quite recently, and it was just something people used to do as a bit of a night dive kind of thing.
So you two may remember more of the origin of it in Palm Beach, but I recall one of our friends that also does the Blackwater dives with us came up to me and was talking about it. And perhaps he had heard about it because I think the year before we started, they were doing them in Hawaii, and proposed it. And we kind of brought it to the captain and the owner of the facility one of the main ones that we run these through, and kind of sorted out how to create the rigging for the dive itself.
The earliest person I know about is Ryo in Japan. But, there was guys like Richard Harbison from Woods Hole. Back in the 70s, he started doing blue water dives in the open ocean to collect and find ctenophores, because they're so hard to preserve, so hard to keep them. So they were going out and collecting them, hand collecting. But so I think that's where the roots of it came from in terms of, these daytime dives, and then just doing it at night's kind of a twist that, I think better camera gear, better scuba equipment, and virally hearing about it from other places. But it's great. It's a lot of fun. We're close to the Gulf Stream, so there's just a lot of water's moving. I mean, some nights we'll only drift a mile or two. Sometimes we'll go 5, 6, 7, 8 nautical miles in a 90-minute to 2-hour dive.
This feels highly, highly technical, this light guide that is helping you along, because you have no frame of reference. You are in a void.
That's your frame of reference. You've got that, and everything's drifting to the north with the Gulf Stream. But depending on which way the wind's blowing, the ball might be going a different direction.
Yeah.
So you might end up swimming east, west, or south even, because the wind is blowing out of the north.
Because you're all current. You have no wind drive.
You're going all current,
have it.
but the float might not be going as fast as you are. So you end up swimming in a different direction. And what can happen is you stop and start taking pictures of some little larval creature, and you collect it, and you're fussing around with your equipment and stuff, and you look around and you can't see the ball anymore. And meanwhile, you've got completely turned around in terms of what direction you're facing. But then you'll see like other divers' lights all around you. So like which way is who's near the ball and who's not, you don't know.
That's what really grabs me, because of course you're in this infinite void with very few reference markers, but the subjects, this is macro photography in the most part. You are zoomed right in this tiny, tiny little world. And I could totally see looking up after getting the fantastic shot or getting lost in the moment and realizing if it wasn't for the bubbles, I wouldn't know what up was.
That's right. Yeah. There's always other lights around. So it's not as disorienting as you'd think it is, but yeah, it's dark and you don't have a frame of reference, and there's certainly no bottom. We always joke, if you go to the bottom, you're only going to see it once. So that's out there.
So yeah, you're getting these classically deep sea critters coming up. And this is what sort of really grabbed me, because a quote that I'd given a couple of times was that the animals that I studied live in such a different environment that to be in the same place at the same time, one of us had to be dead.
Yeah.
Which sort of broke the illusion and sort of really made me humble about how different these environments were. But most of the abyssal fish and a lot of the invertebrates as well, they are dispersed up in the plankton. So I've seen images from you guys you're swimming with a fish I associate with 5,000 meters.
Right.
And probably a big, ugly brown or silver brute of a thing, whereas their kids are beautiful. Like a juvenile cuskeel is spectacular. A juvenile Bathysaurus, a juvenile lizardfish, the adult is a monster. But the juveniles are absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
On the back of this incredible experience, how did that then lead to citizen science? How did you then get involved in the project and the people who were hungry for these specimens?
We all belong to a club. For me, I went to a meeting a long time ago when I first started doing underwater photography, and there was a guest speaker who was talking about the fact that if you get into scuba diving, and I didn't get into it till I was in my 50s, if you get into scuba diving and you don't have a focus, you won't do it for very long. And so photography is my focus, but I wanted to do more than just photography. I wanted to actually do, something with the images, something that lasted longer than just getting a magazine picture or something like that. I wanted to have some sort of impact with the work. So just by chance, I sent an email one night to a guy named Peter Schuchert, who was the curator of invertebrates at the Geneva Museum of Natural History, but also happened to be an editor of Worms, which is the go-to place for marine species taxonomy. So Peter's the editor. So I said, I noticed there's no images in here. We're trying to figure stuff out. We can't find images of the inverts. And, I'm trying to figure out what these things are. And he referred me to Professor Gustav Pauli, who's the curator of invertebrates at the Florida Museum. And they both said the same thing, which is the pictures are great and they're really interesting. And sometimes you can identify species from an image, but most of the time you can't. Most of the time you need a specimen to go with it. You need DNA, you need a specimen that's been preserved. So I met with Gustav and we decided to start collecting these things. And he gave me a whole bunch of gear, started with the most common things first. And gradually, as we learned to recognize the animals that were around us all the time, we started to recognize the ones that were rare, unusual. And Andrea and Linda are two of the best at finding the rare and unusual. I must say, the paper we just published, most of the glory shots were from Andrea and Linda. So we had 49 species of hydrozoans, 2 new species, and a bunch of new species that had never been seen before in the Atlantic. They're not really new to science, but they were species that were heretofore Indo-Pacific. And we continue to find stuff. I mean, that's the amazing thing is if you were doing bird photography and you went out to the Everglades and, I could take pictures of the great blue heron and it would go along with about 100 million other pictures out there of great blue herons. But the stuff we're photographing hasn't been seen in 100 years. Very often we're finding hydrozoans and other animals that haven't been seen since they were described. And that could be 100 years ago.
Even the ones that are relatively well known, quite often we have from, say, plankton toes, we have a preserved specimen, the color's gone, any gelatinous structures have kind of had the water pulled out of them. And it's still important for those counts and measures as a taxonomic specimen, but we've lost the animal in life. And that's what really grabs me about the photography you guys produce is just these things are stunning.
Yeah.
And the behavioral things that are revealed from that as well. It's like, oh, we knew about these structures, but that's what it's for. It's riding a jelly. It's doing something else. Finally, like we've just guessed at what it used that structure for, and now it makes sense when you see it in situ.
Yeah, the Bromidades, the larval fish experts are telling us they've got on their pectoral fins, they have like hooks on them, and they never knew what the hooks were for until people started bringing in pictures of these guys grabbing onto jellyfish or other invertebrates and just riding them, surfing, on top of these animals.
It's June. It's the worm hooks.
Yeah. I think Linda may have a better description or idea, like getting the connection with the scientists as well, like on the larger scale, because you guys started the Facebook page basically where we were posting the images and then all of a sudden scientists were hopping on and they're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, is that the learning curve. We, like Rich was saying, we had no idea what so many of these subjects were. And after maybe we were a year into it, one of the guys in Anilau started the Facebook page, Blackwater Photo Group. And we started posting our findings. And it's like, I don't know what this is, and like we all are. I'm not into the pretty picture and the contest winner. I want to know what it is. And the scientists started paying attention to that group and started giving us ID help because, like you touched on, most of the things that they had seen were collected in a drift net. They're mangled. They haven't seen them with all their appendages flared and what they look like in situ. So it became a win-win. The scientists were looking at the images and saying, oh my God, that's what it really looks like. And this is what it is. And that led to, like I mentioned, we wrote a book to try to educate people. And I've worked really hard to maintain my website with galleries from the Blackwater findings and ID as best as we know it and constantly updated so that, again, learning people in our group, but all over the world, use that website to ID their findings. And the scientists have been so helpful. We never would have had a clue what so much of this stuff was if they hadn't started paying attention.
It's wonderful how this developed organically, just in sharing stuff and sharing an interest. Someone else with the right expertise will see a totally different side to it because they're works of art in their own right. But that extra layer of this is the thing that lives at 5,000 meters and we didn't know it looked like this as a juvenile. We knew they laid eggs. We knew they floated up. That's it. That's where the story ended.
And we knew how many fin rays it had. That's how they did a lot of the counting the fin rays. But to see it just all flared and in its environment. And that's the other advantage. Like with all of the things that we're collecting, we're providing images. So it's not just the subject and the chemical with no color. There's an image that goes with it. At least there's probably 10 images that go with it. So I think that's been a tremendous help to the scientists too with this collecting.
Yeah, it's that individual. You have museum standard sort of logging of this is the picture of this specimen.
Yeah, the collection's in the Florida Museum of Natural History's database, so anybody can look them up. And the data goes in the GenBank, and other people are using the data, for their research as well. We just with the hydrozoans alone, we've been able to identify, I think, 8 new species. That's just stuff that we've collected.
Has your photography changed as you've learned more about the sort of science side of things and you become citizen scientists? Does it change the sort of like, well, this is beautiful composition as a work of art, but I also know what's important as a scientist?
I think if you look at when we first started years ago, it was very much so more ID photographs. And I think Linda can attest to this too, is that it's definitely become more behavioral now. So we certainly have nights where it's not like completely ramped up out there with all these amazing rare deep water species. Like we have slower nights. We started to turn our attention towards interesting behaviors, like seeing some of the things that the critters are eating, like seeing some predation, because that's what so many are out there doing anyway. So you get some interesting opportunities. Or sometimes like I have some interesting cusk eel shots that I wish I would have gotten a great ID shot of its face because it's so cool and it's exciting. It's a great tail shot, like it's a great butt shot. But you can see some really interesting, like you can see the movement of how they swim. You can see different fin rays. You can see what's in their gut because they're so translucent. So things like that, I think, have become a bit more interesting for me anyways than just ID shot.
Linda and Andrea have gotten me a stack of images recently of pelagic nudibranchs feeding.
Wow.
So very little literature about what do they really eat. And we were able to confirm some of the things that were believed, and we found some new things that they dine on as well. So we're working on a paper right now.
There'll be some keen photographers and techie folks listening, I'm sure. What are your setups like? What is I've only seen like looking out of the lens. I don't know what you guys look like when you're down there. I'm guessing it's a handheld rig, lots of dedicated lighting. Do you use different setups? Do you all have your own favorites?
Yep.
Yeah, by and large in West Palm Beach, people use Nauticam brand housings and generally have a Nikon D800 or a D500 camera inside. It's usually a 60 millimeter macro lens, a couple of flashes, and usually focus lights of some sort. And there's a bunch of great brands on the market. The people who are going after larval fishes tend to use much higher powered focus lights or searchlights because they're reaching way out in the gloom to try to find these larval fish, which tend to be a little bit bigger than what some of the invertebrates that we're looking for. A lot of the stuff that that we're looking at in terms of inverts tend to be in the 10 millimeter and under range, and sometimes as small as 2 or 3 millimeters. And I also use some lights in the blue wavelength. I do that to sort of stimulate fluorescence. Some of these creatures fluoresce so strongly that you can see it with the naked eye. You actually don't even need a yellow filter to sort of stimulate a little bit some of this fluorescence. But if you put a yellow filter on the camera and you use these, use some of this blue light, you can find also things that are fluorescing down there.
For one thing, the rigs are big. I mean, you've got this full-blown DSLR in a housing, 2 strobes, 2 focus lights, and I actually use 3 strobes. I'm one of the few that uses 3. So this is very task intensive, trying to get pictures of the subject. And then you have to get it into a bag using lights that are on your camera. I swear most of them know what you're trying to do and take off.
They're all about predator avoidance, and that's what you guys are.
And so my particular rig is a D500 with a 60 millimeter and everything else. And I believe Andrea uses D500 also, right?
I do. My only difference that I have is I am a glutton for more torture, and I use diopters from time to time. So I like to make it even more challenging and get more magnified and get as close to the subject as possible, which sometimes I have to give up, but it can be really rewarding other times.
Andrea's not saying it, but the problem with diopters is you have an extremely shallow depth of field. And again, these moving subjects, it's hard to track it with a diopter on the lens. And so that adds an extra degree of difficulty for sure.
The little cube of water you're trying to get them into.
Yep.
It's really small.
Exactly.
So for me, I take the image and crop it. I mean, most of these subjects, there's no way around it. You're cropping the image unless you're using a diopter. But if you get a really good focus with the camera and the lens combination, you get a really good focus, then you can crop it without any really loss of detail.
Your buoyancy must be absolutely on point. Without a frame of reference, you've just got this tiny little subject. Yeah, I don't think I'm a good enough diver for that. I'm guessing you're trimming lots with your breathing as well. You're just sort of deep breaths and...
Absolutely.
Quite a bit of that, yeah.
Your ears will tell you, my ears will tell me if I'm going deep.
Before the computer starts beeping, you can feel it.
I have a big old-fashioned analog depth gauge on my flashes. It's kind of sitting a little bit in front of my field of view.
It's always in the sort of peripheral vision.
It's always in my field of view, yeah. So if I end up going too deep, I know it, yeah.
That's smart. I'm going to start telling people that now so that they have no excuses.
Well, everyone checks their logs at the end of the dive. It's just like, you got distracted, didn't you? Look at this profile. We talked about exploring it a little bit here because, of course, around New Zealand, we've got some great deep water and some fun currents that it would be fun to interact with. But the immediate worry was, well, you look like a very distracted prey animal because you're focusing in on something else. Do you ever worry about who else is out there watching you?
We've had a couple times where the occasional decent-sized suckerfish comes by, and you definitely look around like, what is it attached to? But at least in our area, we get occasional sharks that come through. I think we've had dolphins have scared a few photographers that are so focused, right? But for the most part, the sharks that we get are more or less just passing through, or in the cooler months, we'll get some juvenile silky sharks that will come in and they'll get really curious and they'll kind of bump you and check you out, which is a bit unnerving. But then I think most of us just get frustrated because now we can't focus on taking photographs of the tiny
spoiling
thing.
the shot.
Right, yeah. We're like, oh, the shark's in the way. Now we have to pay attention to the shark and kind of, nudge it out of the way too. But my biggest highlight is we had a blue shark one night that I thought was I've never seen a blue shark, and they're cold water sharks. So it's so bizarre that it's in the Atlantic. There wasn't much else that we were looking at. Like, it was a very slow night in terms of blackwater creatures. So I was just pumped. I couldn't get a photograph of it because I have the completely wrong lens for it. But
you don't want that shot. You don't want that shot at the few inches from your lens.
Right, exactly.
Actually, the only injuries anybody's gotten have been from billfish, actually. Mm-hmm. Somebody got slapped a few years ago by a swordfish, and we had a little spearfish incident. Someone got speared by a spearfish not too long ago. So that's kind of the only...
It's a few months ago.
But when you consider how many years we've been doing it and how many thousands of hours of man time we've got in the water, it's not not much of a risk.
I'd love to have from each of you, if you have it at the top of your mind, a sort of anecdote of one of your favorite dives or one of your favorite moments. Is there something that, and amongst all of these incredible experiences, is there something that just sort of leaps out at like, that was good. That was a really good one.
I've been diving for over 30 years, and my most recent before this was a lot of muck diving and a lot of looking for little subjects, hunting more so than anything else. And it was always nudibranchs before that. And so I was photographing locally every nudibranch and trying to ID it and learn about it. So one of my, second or third Blackwater dives, I found a pelagic nudibranch and I didn't know there was such a thing. And I was thinking, oh, I'm so happy. There's pelagic nudibranchs. And like Andrea said, now I'm looking for the behavior. It's like, can I get them mating? Can I get them feeding? Can I get them spawning? So you kind of grow with the subject, but I was thrilled that there's nudibranchs.
Yeah, I'd have to go with my first dive. I was one of those people that went on first dive and it was a spectacular night for Blackwater diving. Because, a lot of times we go out and we don't see very much at all. Because, the life in the ocean is kind of patchy and we see that all the time. Some nights we're really in the thick of it. But my first night was spectacular and I haven't seen one since, but I had a larval marlin.
Oh.
And it was probably, about 2 centimeters long, something like that. It was spectacular, beautiful color and had its fin up. And so I got sort of a really prized shot like the first night I was out there. I haven't seen one of those since. So that was a great start. I was hooked.
Oh, I don't know. It's so hard to choose because there's been so many amazing nights. There's one in particular that I guess comes straight into my mind. I think it was last year, the year before, and it just felt like it was one of those nights where you get in the water, it's like perfect visibility. You can see so far, but then every square inch of the ocean has something amazing. Like I felt like I was hopscotching from one subject to another. So it's like I start out and there's this really interesting cuskeel and it's got this beautiful pink speckles on its face. So I'm all giddy about that. I'm taking pictures and hanging out, and there wasn't a lot of wind, so I don't have to chase the ball. You can just stay put, so these are some of the trials and tribulations of Blackwater dives and dealing with the different environmental conditions. Is it low vis? Is there a lot of particulate? Is the wind blowing? Are we going to chase the ball? This and that. And this was just that night where it was perfect and we didn't have to chase the ball. The viz was great. Subjects were everywhere. So there's this first cuskeel and then I get to show it to some other divers, and then I move along to the next section, and like right next to me there's a larval pancake batfish. So that's exciting, and I get to hang out with that. And then I move from there and there's another different species of cuskeel, and it was the night where we just have the different species. And this was before we were even collecting cuskeels, I think, to try to narrow some of those down and get them into species. But I think that was a really big highlight for me. It's just like hopscotching from like one subject to the next to the next. I think those are those moments as a wildlife photographer, or even what you guys do with the deep sea things, where you see it on social media and it's like, oh my gosh, it's just amazing every single night. Well, then it turns out like, there's some nights where you just don't see a whole lot. But that was a good night.
We have hundreds of hours of nothing happening.
Right.
You all seem to have your specialist groups. Is there any particular animals that you've developed a real fondness for? Now, it comes across with the images you guys take. Are there any ones you're particularly fond of, either as an interest in that animal group or just they're always fun to interact with?
I love almost everything I see. It's just, I find them all interesting, but I do have an affinity for jellies and hydrozoans in particular. So.
Well, I have a huge soft spot for cephalopods. I think any cephalopod that I see, and I feel like in all of the Blackwater dives that we've done, I feel like we have barely scratched the surface for cephalopods. So I feel like for those, I'm always like, every time I'm out there, I'm always just like, there's going to be some new amazing cephalopod that they're seeing in Japan or somewhere else that we don't see, but it's here. It's going to be here. So those, I'm waiting. I'm still waiting for the next really cool cephalopod to pop up.
Mollusks, the sea angels and the sea the sea angels and the sea butterflies. Nudies,
okay.
Definitely. Nudies, yes. But I also got really into identifying the sea angels, sea butterflies, and again, back to the behavior, since they're pelagic. You do catch some mating occasionally, although the darn things don't like the lights.
They don't like an audience.
Yes, yes. But you can occasionally get them spawning. But that's been fascinating trying to ID those guys because there hasn't been so much literature on it. And luckily, one of the scientists has been a big help with that.
I feel like we've touched on lots of really useful resources that I think the listeners will be keen to follow up. So we'll put those in the show notes.
Oh, perfect.
So
sure.
Anyone listening, if this has really grabbed you, have a look in the show notes. We'll provide a little info pack. Richard, any of the papers you particularly like that the group's been involved with, we can put those in the show notes as well, because we've got a good mix of sort of science interested people and scientists themselves. We may also inadvertently open a bit of a scientist floodgate, which hopefully will be useful, but you might find some experts appear on your radar, and it's our fault, and I'm sorry. But
I think it's great. I'm eager to give images to any scientists for any projects. If the images will help illustrate these subjects or educate about these subjects, I'm really happy to share. And I think we need to educate people about this environment and the value before it starts getting destroyed, before we even understand it.
This is one of those hidden worlds again, one of those ones that could disappear and we hadn't even got to grasp with it. It's just the open ocean. It's like, no, there's a whole world.
For us, it's just right off the beach. I mean, it's only 5 or 6 miles off the beach. It's not that far away, but it is completely... sometimes I think about it, here in South Florida, there's millions of people live here. And there's just like a handful of us going out and looking at these things every night. It just strikes me as it's a great privilege to be doing it. And at the same time, I'm always surprised that nobody else is doing it. Or there aren't a lot of people doing it because it's pretty cool.
And the things it's linking up with, we pollute the surface waters, or we change what's going on, or change some of these current regimes. And you are knocking out the babies of animals that live at 5,000 meters. This idea that the deep sea is this self-contained little box and it's kind of fun, but you don't have to worry about it. But no, their kids are up with us. They're where we can pollute them and litter them and have quite direct impacts on them.
Their food comes up to the surface to feed, and it's the whole chain is dependent on. I mean, think about all the food that comes just from the elevations that we see. All their little houses collapse and sink to the bottom. It's a major part of the carbon cycle of dropping organic matter to the sea floor, and those guys are living near the surface.
Rich just mentioned the carbon cycling. I mean, that's another whole piece of this that people just have no knowledge of at all and don't understand the value.
This is the biggest migration on Earth, and it happens twice a day, and it's gigatons of carbon that's moving up and down. And it's right there under our noses, and we've not lifted this rock sufficiently. 8 years this has exploded, and the amount we've learned in this time.
Yeah, the gear and the cameras have gotten so much better. The gear is so much better, and like if you think about just the fact that we've identified 8 new hydrozoans over the years here, that new species. When you think about, there's hardly any place else other than maybe the Mediterranean and the North Sea and the Baltic, perhaps, that have been studied as much as the coast of Florida, and we still managed to find that many new species just among the hydrozoans. And that's just a handful of us going out swimming around looking for weird-looking jellyfish. It just boggles your mind as to what is not known among all these other types of animals that haven't been as thoroughly studied. So it's in all these places in the world where no one's been doing this kind of work at all. So it's a big world, and we've only scratched the surface of it. So
yeah, it's eyes in the water. Part of the team science end of things, thank you for what you're doing to progress the scientific understanding, but also what you're doing for science communication and displaying these animals in such an attractive way. It actually does a huge amount, because we can talk about the facts and figures and species numbers and things like that, but actually it's these works of art that grab people. And now I want to know more. Now, okay, you were rattling on about all these numbers of species and all these Latin names. It was all very boring, but this is cool. Now I would like to learn about it. So it's such an onboarding to get people excited in science. It's such an onboarding to get people caring about these animals, because there's so much personality in these shots that you're just like, oh, it was just a number, and now I'm looking at it, and now I kind of want it to be around. So I love this interface. Thank you so much for your time, gang. I really enjoyed chatting with you. Keep in touch. Give us updates of what you're up to. Any specialists you want us to send your way? If you, like you said, these groups that you would like to engage with scientists, I think we can help with that. We've got a nice little community on the go now. So absolutely keep in touch. And I've really enjoyed talking with you all.
We appreciate you having us on.
It's a good chat. I'm really tempted to do it in some spots here, but we talk about it actually, and then they did sort of share some incidents. It wasn't necessarily sharks, but you get so fixated on the macro photography and looking at this thing that's like the size of your thumbnail. You are still sharing the open ocean at night, and you look like something that's floundering and not doing very well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I get fully into the moment, or part of my brain would just be like, just have a little bit of situational awareness every now and then.
Well, you are kind of vulnerable because you're also in the dark. Yeah.
Even just seeing something big come into your lights when it's not penetrating very far. So it's, by the time you see it, it's 2 meters. That spooks me.
Yeah.
Just the side of a humpback or something going through the torch beam.
Yeah.
I think I'd absolutely lose it.
Yeah, don't want to do that.
I'm not brave enough for this. Okay, let's check in for a coffee with Andrew, who's going to continue talking about some of the more unfortunate names of some of the deep sea critters. Some are even his fault.
Coffee's ready.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yes,
Haven't had one in a while. We've missed a
I
few.
know.
We've been busy.
We've been very busy, and
So to start off, we've been really busy because it's very much cruise season. You are disappearing maybe in the next 2 days.
he's heading out for 5 weeks.
But we won't spoil her on that. It's a very
No,
exciting
no,
one, but we'll
no.
definitely have a chat about
Wow.
that
Oh,
when you get
yes,
back
yeah.
because I am excited for that
Yes.
one. There's a couple of things we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
One was on our little Discord channel, the patrons were bouncing around some fun common names.
Ah, right. Yes.
And I don't like the gotcha journalism, but I do.
You got to
I
gotcha.
do keep going. Well,
You got to come back to this and gotcha me again,
well,
aren't you?
this is, you wrote it, mate.
Common name.
You've got a hand in
Yes.
in this
I'm
one.
afraid so.
Bathymicrops brevianalis.
Yes.
What's its common name?
The short ass feeler fish.
And there it is. There it
There
is
it
in
is,
print.
folks. Yes, what's the history behind that? We have a whole suite of these deep water fishes that are only really known to strange people like you and I who love them and think they're wonderful, and we live and die by the Latin binomial. But it can come across very elitist. Paradiptus spinus gracilis, and Solignethus spinosissimus, and
But that's third year Hogwarts stuff.
yeah, it is. It is. Yes, be careful. That's where politicians think all scientists are trained. So we decided that we would create common names for some of these deep water fishes that didn't have accepted common names, and that was at the end of a long day. And no amount of coffee was going to get that creative juices going. And I thought, brevi. It means short fin, but I thought, it's the anal fin, so short ass. It won't fly, it won't get through.
I'll never get that past the editor. And
No,
then-
they're going to take one look at that and go, no, that's not acceptable. There it is in print, the short-ass feelerfish. It's gone through checklist. It has all kinds of sort of connotations that perhaps you wouldn't want to explain to your soon-to-be 5-year-old son.
It's good to make these things more accessible because you're right, the Latin is pretty exclusionary. It's good to give people access to these animals and make them able to
Yes.
feel they can talk about them. Oh, there's some good names in the Cuskies.
Yes.
I think I've mentioned to you Barathrites.
Barathrites.
It's named after the Barathron, which is it's sort of a Roman folklore, I think it was. It was a bottomless pit that criminals were thrown into.
Yeah.
And then there's the Basazitas, which are the ass fish, which is unfortunately asses in donkey, but I still like it, especially that there's a robust one.
I know, but
A robust ass
yeah.
fish is pretty good. And then one that was from one of our listeners, but then you had some stories about it, was the hog choker.
Yes.
Sounds horrible.
I know. It's a little flounder found the east coast of America. And our colleague and friend Tom Munro, who's at NOAA, and I said to him, why is it called the hog choker? He said, well, they're very small, they're rubbish fish. They were sort of kept and fed to pigs. And because of the nature of them, with the pigs, because they just gobble them down, wouldn't chew it much, would sort of choke. But he said that when they got them and they had to go out on the deck and the trawl was dumped on the deck, they had to have spatulas because these things were just on the deck, and no matter what you did, you couldn't get them up.
Like Velcro?
Well, it was just creating a bit of a vacuum seal.
Oh, with how flat they are.
Because they're just so
I've
flat.
certainly had that.
And they said they have these spatulas, and they go...
And I think they're doing it deliberately as well. They're doing a limpet
as a
thing. If they're
defense.
still alive, I think they arch and actually form a suction cup.
Yep.
Oh, I like the idea of spatulas, flipping them like sunny side up eggs.
Yeah, that's the one. Just flip them into the bin. Slatty Bartfast.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, a Hitchhiker's Guide reference.
Hitchhiker's Guide reference.
Oh,
Now,
I like
this
that.
one has got a really rather lovely story to it. We were starting our work in Fiordland, doing specimen collecting, building up species lists for Doc. And the joke was, if we get something new in Fiordland, we've got to name it after Slatty Bartfast. And it was a colleague of ours, Trevor Willis, who came up with a big grin all over his face going, I've caught Slatty Bartfast. And it was a little cusk eel.
Oh.
So Chris subsequently named it. He put it in the genus Fiordicthus.
Why Slatty Bartfast though?
Because Slatty Bartfast built the planet Earth, and he loved fjords, and he got an award for designing and building the fjords.
That was it. Okay, because it says you in Fiordland.
Yeah, Fiordland.
Ah, right. Okay.
And it's subsequently been put in Bioluminescence, different genus. But anyway, Chris sent a copy of the paper off to Douglas Adams's publisher.
Is this after he'd passed?
No.
Oh, because
He passed
into it.
Yeah.
Oh.
He said, look, he's probably busy, he probably gets a ton of fan mail, but just FYI, here you go. Well, it got to Douglas Adams, who sent Chris an email, and it said something like, I don't normally put much stock on these things, but I couldn't help but notice it was published on my 42nd birthday.
Oh.
So it kept going round and round.
Oh, 42.
Yes. So, yeah.
Oh, that's good.
I know.
That is
good. It went full circle. We thought he was just having fun, but no, there were deeper meanings to this.
Gosh, the stars aligned on that one.
I know. It wouldn't happen very often, would it?
Let's have a palate cleanser with some art. So listener Eleanor Wall shared a poem about when the fascination with the deep sea first grabbed her, and she was kind enough to record it for us in her own words. So over to Eleanor.
In Awe of the Dark by Eleanor Wall. My first inkling of the deep dark was the spectacle of a life-size plaster giant squid, locked in a life-or-death struggle with a plaster sperm whale, in the museum's rendering of total darkness, tucked in a corner of the hall, beaming out the terror of titans where light didn't reach, that rippled beneath my skin and made the heart shrink. At age 10, I got lost in the sensory deprivation maze at the Liberty Science Center, and with the dark and silence crushing me in, I hallucinated a sunrise, and was only brought back to myself by a father bumping into me, shouting in fury, before I groped my way improbably back to the entrance, crying in terror for the open daylight. For years after, I refused to sleep without a lamp on, fearing the dark would close on me like a clamshell and wrap me in the cilia of despair. And yet, deep in prayer on Sundays, with my backside biting into the pew, the approach to God wasn't an ascent through golden clouds, but a descent down a black well, infinitely long and wide, and at its end an open space of absolute dark, and in it bloomed radiance in colors no human eye had beheld. I am reliably informed that far below the ocean waves, where humans can only descend with great effort and hang cocooned in the shell of their diving apparatus, they bear witness to a host of swirling incarnate lights, a congregation where the tremors of the sunlit world no longer reach, where the so-called redness of tooth and claw is deepened and softened into undulant black membranes, and even the sperm whale and squid, the predatory gods, are humbled by the stillness of the tides and the embrace of gravity, the wideness of being born of the darkness that cradles the liquid cosmos and turns the sediment of ages into living stars, winking their greetings throughout the abyss.
So that concludes this episode of the Deep Sea Podcast. As ever, we will deep sea you next time. We abyss you already, and we... I can't do it. I'm out of rhythm. I added to it. I cheated. Megan came up with a good one, and I added to it.
Go on then, say it. I know what you're going to say. I can see it on your notes.
I know, it spoils the reveal, doesn't it? We'll deep sea you next time. We abyss you already, and we Haddle to say goodbye.
That doesn't work at all.
It's strained, isn't it?
Yeah.
The best ones are. Also the
But
worst
you
ones.
use Haddle, not Hadle, so we Hadle to say goodbye. So is it supposed to be you struggle to say goodbye or you hate to say goodbye? So in the Raise episode, when we had the guy on talking about Raise and skates, you could have said, we skate to say goodbye. Because skate rhymes with hate. That's how these jokes work. Hadle only rhymes with ladle. And so you could get some sort of soup serving joke in there. Nothing springs to mind, but yeah.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That's brilliant. Thanks. You've saved the show.
See you next month, gang. If you would like to advertise with the Deep Sea Podcast, feel free to get in touch. Our audience is primarily young people with an interest in science, often undergraduates or people considering a degree in marine science, but it also includes established scientists. Feel free to get in touch if you're interested in reaching these groups. If I lose 3 kilograms of leg, do I get that as extra baggage on a plane? Could I make a case for that?
I think you shouldn't. Do you get it back if you go to heaven?
Now that's a whole thing. That's a whole thing. And that's different here. But you can request to get anything they've taken out of you back.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, held. So if you
where is it all held?
That's good. That's good beer chat. That
I was tempted to tick it, even though they hadn't removed anything, to see if maybe a clerical error would get me something.
Oh, that's really odd. So there must be somewhere nearby.
The warehouse.
It must look a lot like your fish collection, only everything in it is like hands and eyeballs and ears and things that have been cut off people, just with a little QR code saying, Tom Nunley, here's his food. Should he ever want it back?
There's a few religions where you have to be buried intact, or you'll be missing bits in the afterlife.
But I mean, what if the other bit's like you like lose a hand like 50 years before you die? I mean, it's not actually, the hand's not there anymore, right?
I think I honestly don't know, but I think it is waiting for you in your plot. I think you put it in.
Oh, you bury it in a plot and then you jump in with it. Right. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah. And what happens if you don't? If theoretically you I mean, is there a way the all-seeing man god would know that that's not your hand? Do they stop you at the pearly gates and go, hey, Tom?
If you could weekend at Bernie's it in with a mannequin hand.
Yeah, you go, Tom, show me your left hand again. And you're like, blah, 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 it's all good. Wavy, how you doing? So, like, stop waving, Tom, stop waving. Just let me see that hand for a second. You're like, oh, it's just an inflatable marigold. And you're like, busted. That's it.
Oh, and then when they sort of try and manhandle me, my jacket crinkles and it's like Andy's trying to sneak in sweets from outside.
Exactly.
Doing a little cinema run.
Yeah. And you'll end up in eternity in hell because you decided to try and cheat the system.
And try and get some Jolly Ranchers in so I didn't have to pay the extortionate prices in heaven.
I'll bet they are expensive up there.
Yeah, it's like Disneyland, isn't
it? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that'll be the bit at the end.
I'll need to think about that.
Yeah, have a ponder.
There's a lot to think about in that one. Whew.